Rejoice. Again, I say rejoice. I have some great news about the Catholic priesthood. If you're Catholic, you're going to want to hear this. But first, I want to give a shout out and a thank you to Harvest Your Production. I'm not sure who you are, but you just donated a generous gift to my Patreon account. You said it was a Christmas gift, so thank you. I didn't even know you could do that. So if you're not familiar with my Patreon account, it's Blue Collar Catholic or Patreon / Blue Collar Catholic or Blue. It's in there. If you look in, the About Me, hit About, and it tells you a little bit about me. It's in there. But my son had set it up years ago when I got laid off. And it was really helpful, supplemented the unemployment. And then once I got a job, I was working like 70 hours a week. And I felt like the Lord wanted me to do this more. And he showed me I could supplement my full-time job with that. And it's been the reason I'm able not to have to work two jobs. Because for a while I was waiting tables. If you remember Al Capone restaurant, if you follow me, I had to dress like a gangster, and it's kind of like an acting, serving job, but it had me working 7 days a week. So anyway, so I thank you, Patreons. I have, everyone just gives a little bit what they could give, but I have one dear lady who probably gives 90%, and if it wasn't for her, I really honestly would have to get a part-time job. And a lot of people ask me, how they can donate, so it would be Patreon / Blue Collar Catholic, I think, or it's Blue Collar Catholic / Patreon. And I used to think you had to, commit to a monthly, like a lot of people do $5 a month, $10 a month, except for the one generous woman who also is very generous with her wisdom. She always has very wise comments and emails to encourage me. But apparently you can do a one-time gift if you want to give me a Christmas gift. I'll accept. Speaking of Christmas gifts, I got this cool shirt from my daughter. And I also sell shirts. Another way you can support me on Teesprings. Just basically stuff like I say on here, like Stay Catholic. It just shirt says Stay Catholic. And then when the Democrats were giving that Supreme Court Justice, I forget her name right now, devout Catholic, a hard time. And Feinstein said, "Your dogma lives loudly in you. I can't approve you." They were like so anti-Catholic. So I made shirts saying the dogma lives loudly in me. So kind of in your face to the Democrats. And then one day I was talking about my grandsons running around in diapers, playing army, shooting each other with machine guns. And I call them snipers in diapers. So you can get a little onesie for your boys that say sniper in diapers. So just little things like that. Because with this new year coming, Lord willing, I can do more of this. I have a lot of great guests coming on by the grace of God. We were able to get the president of the USCCB, Archbishop Broglio. We're going to try and get him back. We've had Dr. Scott Hahn. We've had Steve Ray. We've had some guests that I would never imagine would say yes to me. But they're not saying yes to me. They're saying yes to you. Because if I didn't have any subscribers, they wouldn't give me the time of day. I mean, I don't know. They're all very nice guys, generous with time. And I admired all of the guests I've had on here. So anyway, with all that being said, a couple days ago, I made a video called Great News for the Catholic Church. And I was talking about the growth in the church and all, awesome things that are happening in the church today. And I always get saying people like, "Oh yeah, okay, so the church is growing, but what about the priesthood?" So today we're going to talk about the priesthood. But at first I want to say there's a lot of Protestant Christians on YouTube that are protesting the Catholic Church, Protestants. And a lot of them still want to call themselves Catholic. Yet their whole program every day is telling you what's wrong with the Catholic Church, what's wrong with the priesthood, what's wrong with the Pope. And I catch them in lies and slanders, and, I call them out. So a lot of Catholics that watch a lot of YouTube are surprised to hear great news. So when I had that one show great news about the Catholic Church, I got quite a few people who are like, yeah, the church is growing, but talk about the priesthood. Yeah, the priesthood is down. So, and oh man, I keep losing this. You guys give me a Christmas gift. I'll get a computer with it. I keep losing. This computer is terrible. Oh my goodness, this is so annoying. I was gonna read something to you and I lost it. All right, I got it back. I'm gonna read it to you in a second, but this is what they're talking about. Here are the facts. 1970, there were 419,313 Catholic priests worldwide. Today, well, 2022 is the latest figure I could find. There's only 407,730 priests. So it's like a drop of 12,000 priests worldwide. But it doesn't sound like a lot. But if you watch my video about great news, the Catholic Church has more than doubled since 1970. 1970, there was like 650 million Catholics worldwide. Today, there's 1.4 billion. And in the last 10 years, we've really grown. You know, we just really grew a lot the last 10 years. So there is a shortage of priests. But I don't see that as bad news because Jesus tells us this. John chapter 15, verses 1 through 5. I am the true vine, and my Father is the vine dresser. Every branch of mine that bears no fruit, he takes away. And every branch that does bear fruit, he prunes, that it may bear more fruit. You are already made clean by the word which I have spoken to you. Abide in me, and I in you. As the branch cannot bear fruit by itself, unless it abides in the vine, neither can you unless you abide in me. I am the vine, you are the branches. He who abides in me, and I in him, he it is that bears much fruit. For apart from me, you can do nothing. Okay, I said 1 through 5, but we're going to go a little further. If a man does not abide in me, he is cast forth as a branch and withers, and the branches are gathered, thrown into the fire, and burned. John 15, 1 through 6. So Jesus prunes his church, but more specifically, he prunes his priesthood. So yes, our priesthood isn't as big, but he pruned it, and we have the strongest priesthood now. This priesthood today is much stronger than it was in 1970. After World War II, a lot of homosexuals lied to get into the priesthood, to kind of hide, or during World War II in Vietnam, all this stuff. Somehow a lot of homosexual priests snuck in. A lot of very liberal priests snuck in. Today, I'll read you the facts, and then I'm going to give you some of what I see firsthand, So this is the pillar. I read this in the other video, but apparently people didn't watch the whole video, so I'll read it again. This is the pillar, a Catholic newspaper, dated November 7, 2023. Study. This is like the most extensive study done on Catholic priests. They did a lot of things, but this was the one thing that I got out of it. Study. Liberal U.S. priests facing progressive extinction. The share of new U.S. Catholic priests identifying as theologically progressive has fallen so low that the phenomenon has all but vanished, according to a report published Tuesday. The 18-page report issued November 7 by the Catholic University of America in Washington, D.C., said that when priests were asked to describe their theological outlook on a spectrum from very conservative, very orthodox, to very progressive, none of those, nada, ordained after 2020 described themselves as very progressive. The report included a graph that the proportion of priests who identified as somewhat progressive or very progressive fell almost 70% among those ordained in 1965 to 1969, to less than 5% among those ordained in 2020 or later. So from 70% to 5%. In 1965 to 1969, this is when we had all those priests everybody's worried that we lost. What did we lose? We lost all the progressives. Researchers said there was a similar drift away from political liberalism and toward moderate and conservative positions. That's why I always say I talk on the show politics and religion, because you can't separate it. You can't be a conservative Catholic and be a liberal Democrat. It's like oil and water. Simply put, the portion of new priests who see themselves as politically liberal or theologically progressive has been steadily declining since the Second Vatican Council, and now is all but vanished. All but vanished. So yes, we have less priests, but the priests we have are strong. I just told you, well, I didn't just tell you, I was thinking it. I can tell you firsthand, when I first came back to the Catholic Church, we had an older priest. He wasn't quite old enough to retire, but he's been a priest like 30 years. And he seemed to be liberal. He didn't really say anything. I didn't hear him say it. I never heard him. I listened careful to see if he was saying anything unorthodox, but he just tended to be liberal. He never said anything outright against the church, but he just you could just tell he was liberal, and what he didn't say maybe spoke volumes. He was more about happiness than holiness, if you understand that. And I remember he kind of seemed to believe the propaganda that Pope Francis was gonna bring in all this liberal stuff like ordaining women and blessing same-sex unions. And I remember when Pope Francis came out and said, the church cannot bless same-sex unions because God cannot bless sin. He resigned from the priesthood a week later. He asked for a really early retirement, and our bishop said no. Now, I don't know if that was the reason, but that's what I kind of felt like it was. And he was replaced by the most orthodox, on-fire young priest in his 30s. And then we had another conservative priest. He was older, but he retired. And he was replaced by another conservative young priest in his 20s. We also have another young priest, and I'm talking 20s and 30s when I say young. Another young priest, he's in our diocese. He ministers to the veterans at the VA, but he also helps out in our church, in our parish. And he's an on-fire priest who came from the largest parish in Nigeria, Africa. He's an on-fire African priest, and talk about the joy of the Lord. And he is so orthodox and so conservative. And then we had in our diocese, who's visiting us now because he's on a sabbatical, getting 2 doctorates in theology, Father Blake Britton, who we've had on the show, and Lord willing, while he's on Christmas break, I'm going to try and grab him and get him on again. Brilliant scholar and a father who is so on fire for the Lord. It's contagious. When he walks by you, you just want to smile, because he's like, if like you Google Joy of the Lord, his picture will be there with a big grin. That's Father Blake Britton. These are, again, I think he's in his 20s or 30s maybe. Again, on fire priest. So what that report found, I am seeing with my own eyes. And even the bishops we had. I had Archbishop Timothy Broglio, like 2 weeks after he was elected to be a president of the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops. When I was a protesting Christian, when I was a Protestant evangelical, I used to hear that the USCCB was full of liberals. And I invited this guy on, and I spoke to him. And this guy is conservative and orthodox and on fire for the Lord. He told me when Obama was president, and he's still the head of the Archdiocese of the military. So my daughter, whose husband is in the military, that's his bishop. And I told him I met the guy. He's really cool. So anyway, Archbishop Broglio told me on this show, you can check out the interview, I'll put it up. He said when Obama was president, and he told all the clergy, all the chaplains, they had to marry same-sex couples. He said, I will not, like he told Obama face to face, I will not allow my priests to marry same-sex couples. And I said, what Pope Francis had to say. He said, I had Pope Francis 100% behind me and told me to stick to my guns. So much for these liberal USCCB bishops. Bishop Barron, another bishop, always proud, always boldly preaching pro-life and pro-traditional marriage. Bishop Salvador Corleone, this ain't the Godfather, Salvatore Corleone in San Francisco, warned Nancy Pelosi over and over again about her radical, extreme abortion position. And then finally, she wouldn't take his counsel. So he asked Pope Francis, what should I do? He said, follow the instructions of Pope Benedict when he was Cardinal Ratzinger. He laid out instructions for politicians who outright disobeyed the church. And those instructions were, try and counsel them, bring them to repentance. But if they are like outright refusing to listen to that's where Nancy Pelosi got to the point in the beginning. She would listen to them and give them lip service, and then she just totally rebelled against them and gave them the finger. He told her she can no longer receive the Eucharist. And now people say, oh, she went to the Vatican and received it. Well, according to tradition, canon law, her bishop tells all the clergy in his diocese, you can't give her the Eucharist. Then when she leaves, it's up to her. The curse is on her. 1 Corinthians chapter 11 is clear. If you eat the Eucharist, if you're unworthy, if you're out of the state of grace, you're eating judgment on yourself. So when she went to the Vatican and she took it, she wasn't fooling nobody, but she wasn't hurting no one but herself. So it wasn't Pope Francis' job to look for him and say, oh, don't give it to that one, don't give it to this one. I mean, so many unholy people go that shouldn't get the Eucharist according to 1 Corinthians chapter 11 and according to church teaching. But it's up to them. Once they leave their diocese, it's up to them. So it gets better. So we have all these good priests, all these good bishops, but the amount is so little. Like how can 407,000 priests handle 1.4 billion Catholic Christians? Well, Vatican II brought in a renewal of the Holy Spirit. Like the church was kind of like we were like the frozen chosen. We were kind of like, And then when Vatican II came blowing through, you had the charismatic renewal, the new evangelization, people getting excited about the scriptures again, excited about the gifts of the Spirit again, excited about evangelization. And the church did something that they tried in Trent, but for some reason just didn't get off the ground. Trent, by the time the Council of Trent came, the tradition of having permanent deacons was gone. By the time Vatican II came, in 1965, we had 0 permanent deacons. Today, by the grace of God, we have 50,000 permanent deacons. So if you add 50,000 to 407, that's 457,000 clergy in 2022 versus, and if the number is the same today, it's a 2022 number versus 419,000. So we have more total. Again, it's not as much as we need. So we need to pray for vocations. But the ones that are coming in are just as conservative as my priest I'm talking about. I was blessed. I bumped into a seminarian from our diocese today in the supermarket. And this kid is on fire for the Lord. He's excited about the church. Orthodox, conservative. And I've met several seminarians in our diocese. It's the same. It's always the same. So the future of the church is bright. I interviewed Dr. Scott Hahn's son, Father Jeremiah, in his 20s on this show. Check it out. Young, on fire priest. Loves the church. Grodi, Father Grodi, Marcus Grodi's son. Another young, on fire priest, I think in his 20s, I had on the show. The future of the church is bright. The priesthood is getting stronger. God pruned it. And just like when you go, I'm not a gardener, but I'm a city boy. I grew up in Newark, New Jersey. Watched the sad documentary about Newark on HBO Max. Somebody gave me a link and I downloaded the app, and it's about Newark, New Jersey, where I grew up. Very sad, called Life of Crime. Could have been me. One of the characters' names was Rob, and his girlfriend's name was Jackie. That's my wife's name. It was very the Lord really touched me with that show. Very depressing, but very enlightening. So anyway, getting back to the track here, the priesthood has been trimmed down. God's church has been pruned, and it's stronger than ever. It is stronger than ever. And, you know, I know I'll get negative comments because, like I said, there's people on YouTube that call themselves Catholics that make a living full time. You know, you guys help me out. Most of my videos get demonetized or shadow banned, so I make maybe like $75 a month on the YouTube money and a little bit more on the Patreon. So I couldn't do this full time. Some of these guys get a lot and do this full time. But their full-time job is to criticize the church, to criticize priests, to criticize bishops, to criticize the Pope, pointing out everything they think, you know, because they know better. Of course, they know better because they might have a doctorate in philosophy or in education, so they know better than the Pope and the church that Jesus Christ established. So all day long, all they do is criticize. So I know a lot of you guys out there are conditioned. And your first thing was like, oh, well, what about canceling all these good priests? And whenever I say, well, name one that Pope Francis canceled. I'm like, oh, if they're pro-homosexual, if they're anti-homosexual or they're not liberal, he cancels them. Yeah, tell that to Father Greg Reynolds. Father Greg Reynolds was the first priest Pope Francis excommunicated. And he excommunicated him because he was promoting the ordination of women. He was preaching that we should ordain women. He was preaching same-sex unions. So Father Reynolds, one of the most liberal priests, was excommunicated by Pope Francis. You see, sometimes God prunes his branches by, like, my liberal priest just resigning, finding stuff like this ain't a safe culture here. There's too many on fire, holy priests. I need to leave. Or sometimes he brings it to the Pope's attention and he kicks them out. And you know, and then add to that these 50,000 deacons. Most of them are married men. Most of these are on fire Christian men who love the Lord, on fire Catholic Christian men who love the church. So now you have a whole culture where Pope Francis is telling his bishops in Italy, I said on my last video, do not allow seminarians who have a hint of femininity, even if they say they're not gay. If you sense a hint of femininity, don't let them in. We cannot allow homosexuals into the priesthood. And you're saying, Rob, why do you keep talking about homosexuals? Because all these liberal priests were either homosexuals or very feminine, to say the least. These are the guys that God pruned. And it's funny because these so-called cancel priests, like disgraced Vigano, back in the day, a lot of people don't know this, he was very close with a homosexual bishop, Bishop Niestat, who resigned in disgrace, but he would have been excommunicated because Vigano was sent to oversee an investigation, and the priests around there said he was like so friendly with this gay priest, he shut the investigation down. Later on, when the stuff came out in the papers about this homosexual Bishop Niestat, he resigned. Then Vigano was supposed to watch another homosexual bishop, McCarrick, and when the 2018 report came out, it showed that he was friendly with this gay guy. I mean, it's kind of weird, but it's kind of disturbing, but I'm just telling you the truth. And he knew the report was going to make him look bad, and he knew Pope Francis was going to laicize McCarrick. So before the report came out, he tried to flip the script and say Pope Francis is protecting McCarrick, when Pope Francis was the one that actually laicized McCarrick. And now, what's he do? He pulls a Martin Luther, leaves the church, and calls the Pope an antichrist, just like Martin Luther did. And interestingly enough, another group that's always criticizing the Pope was started by their founder, Marcel Lefebvre, another disgraced excommunicated Catholic, who was very friendly with another gay priest, very friendly with Carlos Urigati, a homo predator priest. And it's funny because Lefebvre called Pope St. John Paul an antichrist. And his followers talk about him like he's a saint, and Pope St. John Paul's a bad pope. But what's interesting, and the good news about the Catholic Church, I made a video the other day, was the sex abuse scandal is done. But in these groups, Vigano belongs to a cult called the Resistance, where they don't think there's been a pope since Vatican II. They're Sedevacantists. And they're having major homo, predator, child sex abuse scandals over in Europe right now being investigated. And the group that Lefebvre started, the SSPX, they're also having a major homo, child sex abuse problem. Because you see, the homosexual priests that left, if they wanted to stay, they went to these groups because they have no authority. They don't answer to the Pope. They have their own little clique, so they can hide them away. And they try, on YouTube, they're paying people to say the Pope is the guy that's the problem. The church is the problem. It's very simple, church. If you don't want to be confused, never go against the family. Never go against your father. Never go against Pope Francis. Never go against your bishop. And you'll stay safe. You follow these little cults, and this is what happens. All these cults eventually always become liberal groups. The old Catholics that rejected Vatican I, their priests are now ordaining women. And they're still waiting for the church to reject Vatican II. And they call themselves the real Catholics and say we're in schism. The Lutherans, I just put up a video where they're saying they're the true Catholics, that we're still in schism because they rejected Trent. SSPX rejects parts, they say, of Vatican II, and that we're in schism because we accept all of Vatican II. Yet they call the ordinary Mass that 90% of us go to intrinsically evil. And they're saying there's no good. They're saying if you get the divinity, the full divinity, flesh and blood of Jesus Christ, you're participating in something intrinsically evil. This is what the SSPX says. This is the group that Taylor Marshall's always bragging about. Kennedy Hall's proud to be a member of. These guys have huge YouTube channels. So if you're confused why you haven't heard the great news about the Catholic priesthood, you might be listening to the wrong people. Jesus warned us about wolves in sheep clothing. In fact, Paul told Timothy, Satan comes as an angel of light. Why would you be surprised if his servants came as angels of righteousness? It's very simple. Just obey canon law. Look up canon law 1373, canon law 1404, and rest in the grace of God. Rest in the bosom of Mother Church, and you will experience the joy of the Lord. So I tell you again, rejoice. Again, I say rejoice.